You know, we all like to think we're firmly in the driver's seat of our own minds, right? We see folks talking about the Illuminati or, lizard people running the world, and we kind of pat ourselves on the back, thinking, phew, at least I'm not that far gone. But what if that line, the one between being a healthy skeptic and a full blown conspiracy theorist, what if it's way, way thinner than we think? And what if one of the absolute craziest sounding conspiracy theories actually turned out to be true? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dig into.
Yeah, it's a really comforting thought, isn't it? You look at the pyramid with the eye on the dollar bill and you just see, well, a weird design. Not the all-seeing eye of some secret group pulling all the strings. It's easy for us to just write off these huge, sprawling theories as, just delusions. But when we do that, we skip over a really, really interesting question. And the question is this: why are we so drawn to these kinds of ideas? I mean, what is it about our brains that makes them so appealing? Well, it turns out the very same mental wiring that helps us survive day to day is the exact same wiring that can send us spiraling down a rabbit hole. We are, at our core, meaning-making machines, hardwired to spot patterns and purpose, even when there's nothing there at all. So, okay, let's get into the psychology of it, because before we can just dismiss anyone as a conspiracy theorist, we really have to understand how our own minds are built.
It all comes down to something called hyperactive agency detection. Now, that sounds complicated, but it's really not. It's our built-in tendency to see purpose or agency behind everything. Think about it. Our ancient ancestors hear a rustle in the bushes. The one who thinks wind might get eaten. The one who thinks tiger runs and survives. So it's not a bug in our software, it's a feature. But when that feature goes into overdrive, that's when you start seeing faces in your toast, or a grand secret plot behind every dip in the stock market. It's not a flaw, it's just part of being human.
And this is where that slippery slope really comes into play. I mean, take Big Pharma. It's one thing to say, okay, drug companies have a ton of money, they lobby politicians, they have their own interests. That's just a fact of life. But it's a huge leap from that to believing they're one giant evil entity secretly hiding cures for every disease just to make a buck. See the difference? It's the gap between spotting real, limited power and inventing total, absolute control. That's the murky water where healthy skepticism can, curdle into full-blown paranoia.
Okay, so we've talked about the psychology. We've drawn a line between reasonable doubt and, paranoid fantasies. But now we're going to flip the script completely.
Because what if one of these mind control conspiracies wasn't a theory at all? What if I told you the US government actually ran a secret program designed to control people's minds, using drugs, hypnosis, even torture, on its own citizens who had no idea what was happening? Because they did. It was absolutely real. And it had a name. It was called Project MKUltra. For 20 years, from 1953 all the way to 73, the CIA ran these horrifying experiments. And they weren't doing it in some secret bunker. They were doing it through universities, hospitals, even prisons, using front organizations to hide what was really going on. And get this, in 1973, the CIA director ordered most of the files destroyed illegally, but some of them survived. And when Congress finally uncovered the program in 1975, what was left was enough to absolutely stun the public. This wasn't a theory, this was government policy. And the methods they used, it's straight out of a horror movie. They were dosing people with LSD without their knowledge. They used hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, psychological torture, verbal and sexual abuse, even electroshocks. All of it was a desperate search for a way to crack the code of the human mind and control it. And remember, this wasn't happening in some enemy country. This was happening right here in the US and Canada to people who had no idea they were guinea pigs. And maybe the most chilling part of all is that we'll probably never know how bad it really got. This quote from the actual US Senate report in 1977 says it all. Because the records were purposefully destroyed, the full story, including how many people died, might be lost forever. The truth wasn't just hidden, it was actively, deliberately buried. The reality was so much worse than what most people could even dream up in a conspiracy theory. Okay, so if a massive government agency could actually do this, it raises a huge question. How? How does it actually work? Well, it turns out there is a kind of playbook for it, a system of manipulation that psychologists have been studying for a very long time. The psychologist Margaret Singer broke it down into these 6 key conditions. It's a step-by-step process. Step 1, and this is the most important, The person has no idea they're being manipulated. Step 2, you control their environment. Everything. Where they live, who they talk to, what their schedule is. Step 3, you make them feel powerless by cutting them off from their old friends and family. This just shatters their confidence. 4, you set up a system of rewards and punishments to get them to do what you want. 5, you reward them anytime they accept the group's ideology, and punish them hard for any criticism. And finally, step 6, you build a totally closed system. It's top-down, authoritarian. There's no questioning the leader. Ever. There's another really great way to look at this called the BITE model. BITE. It stands for behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. So behavior control is managing every part of your physical life, what you wear, where you live, your money. Information control is all about deception, lying to you, cutting you off from outside news, and feeding you a steady diet of propaganda. Thought control is where they force you to adopt their beliefs, using these little thought-terminating cliches to shut down any critical thinking. And finally, emotional control is about hijacking your feelings, making you feel guilty or programming you with irrational fears, phobias about what would happen if you ever tried to leave. You put all 4 of those together, and you've got a pretty terrifying system for controlling someone. So these playbooks, these models, they can sound a little abstract, a little theoretical, but they have been put into practice with absolutely horrifying results by some of the most notorious people you can think of. In fact, a pretty recent dissertation from Walden University gives us a chillingly clear window into the kinds of personalities who are drawn to this stuff. The research dug deep, analyzing the common traits and tactics of some really famous cult leaders. And this is where it gets really interesting, because you see exactly how a person's personality becomes the engine for the playbook. Look at the common thread here. Narcissism, right? This deep, unshakable belief that they are just more important than anyone else. For Charles Manson, his antisocial personality, that lack of remorse, is what powered his use of fear, drugs, and sex. For Jim Jones, it was borderline traits, that intense fear of being abandoned, the extreme moods. That's what drove him to create Jonestown, this totally isolated world built on constant fear, where the only way out was mass suicide. David Koresh, with his Messiah complex, used that to build his entire belief system. You see? The personality isn't just a side note, it's the very thing that makes the manipulation possible. So we've looked at the extremes, right? We've talked about secret CIA projects and infamous deadly cults. But now, for the last and maybe most important part, we need to bring this all much, much closer to home. I mean, sure, these tactics sound extreme when you talk about cults, but what about milder versions of them? Can you spot them in your own life? Seriously, think about it for a second. A toxic relationship, a super high-pressure job, a political group, even the ads you see every day. The very same principles, control, isolation, a little bit of manipulation, they show up in much quieter, much more subtle ways. The real question is, are you able to see them? So here are a few things to keep an eye out for. Gaslighting. That's when someone makes you question your own sanity. They say things like, oh, you're just being crazy, or that never happened. Creating a scapegoat. Always blaming some outside person or group for everything that goes wrong, so they never have to take responsibility. Social proof, that pressure to just go along with something because everybody's doing it. Isolation, slowly, maybe sneakily, cutting you off from your friends or family, anyone who might contradict their story. And then there's phobia indoctrination, that's creating a deep, irrational fear of what will happen if you leave. Think of a boss saying, if you quit this job, you'll be blacklisted. All of these are straight out of that same scary playbook. And really, it all comes down to this single crucial point. You can't fight back against something if you don't even know it's there. The most powerful form of control is always the one you don't see. So, awareness. That is your first and your best line of defense. Knowing this playbook isn't about making you paranoid, not at all. It's about making you harder to fool, harder to manipulate. It's about protecting the one thing that is fundamentally yours, your own mind.